A reading from Mark chapter 2, beginning at the 23rd verse. One Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grainfields, and as they made their way, his disciples began to pluck heads of grain. And the Pharisees were saying to him, "Look, why are they doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath?" And he said to them, "Have you never read what David did when he was in need and was hungry, he and those who were with him? How he entered the house of God in the time of Abiathar the high priest, and ate the bread of the presence, which it is not lawful for any but the priests to eat, and also gave it to those who were with him. And he said to them, The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath." Again he entered the synagogue, and a man was there with a withered hand. And they watched Jesus, to see whether he would heal him on the Sabbath, so that they might accuse him. And he said to the man with the withered hand, "Come here." And he said to them, "Is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do harm, to save life or to kill?" But they were silent. And he looked around at them with anger, grieved at their hardness of heart, and said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." And he stretched it out, and his hand was restored. The Pharisees went out and immediately held counsel with the Herodians against him, how to destroy him. There's a phrase which I often hear in Eastern Orthodox services which has caught my ear. It goes like this when addressing God: "For you are a merciful God who loves mankind." It's that last bit, "who loves mankind," which has caught my ear, which has given me something to think about, which I've often dwelt upon. We have a God who loves mankind. Now, of course, this isn't some invention of the Eastern Church. We find this in Scripture itself. Think of that well-known verse of John's Gospel, which is read out at every single Book of Common Prayer communion service. "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son," and so forth. God so loved the world. Or think of the Apostle Paul when he's writing to the church in Rome and begins that great letter by addressing them as, quotes, "all those in Rome who are loved by God and called to be saints." So you have a God who loves mankind, a God who loves that which he has created. And that came into my mind as I read through that passage just now about the Sabbath. Because when we look at the commandments of God, such as the Sabbath, we often receive them, we often experience them as something restrictive. We sometimes receive them as something which is hard to do, or almost a challenge that is to be met. It's like school rules, something we might use to judge the holiness of other people, which of course is what the Pharisees were doing just here. They were judging Jesus' holiness by his absolute keeping of the law of the Sabbath. But that's to miss the point. As Jesus pointed out, the Sabbath was made for man. As a child, I had to obey all sorts of rules, but they were there for my benefit. As an adult, I have to make sure I drive on the correct side of the road in order to save my life. These rules are not restrictive, they're life-giving. These rules allow me to live out my life in safety. They are there for my good. And that is the point. That is the point of all these commandments of God. They are there to help us thrive. They are there not as some sort of arbitrary command of an overbearing despot, but rather they're put there by a God who, to use the words of those liturgies, loves mankind. So it is with the Sabbath. It's not there as a restrictive thing. It's not there to try and tie us up and make us less productive, to keep us indoors like some sort of divine curfew. That's not at all the point. It's a reflection of the fact that we need rest. God rested on the seventh day of creation. Why should we be any better than him? We need rest. We need to stop. We need to refocus. We need to set our gaze upon God once more. But we tend not to do it. We become over busy. We wear ourselves out. We go round in circles, and so the commandment comes. Stop. Rest. That is the Sabbath. You see, we all have a tendency to look at the letter of the law, but not the point of the law. And by so doing, we miss it. We miss why it's there. We see it as something restrictive, not as something law and life, rather, giving. That's the problem of the Pharisees. The Sabbath isn't set up as a test to see how much you really love God. The Sabbath is there to help you have a regular pattern of worship, a pattern of rest, to help you grow in holiness. It's a holy day. The old Bishop of Liverpool, the first Bishop of Liverpool, in fact, J.C. Ryle, put it like this: "But the Sabbath is God's merciful appointment for the common benefit of all mankind. It was made for man. It was given for the good of all classes, for the laity as much as for the clergy. It is not a yoke, but a blessing. It is not a burden, but a mercy. It is not a hard, wearisome requirement, but a mighty public benefit. It is not an ordinance which man is bid to use in faith without knowing why he uses it. It is one which carries with it its own reward. It is good for man's body and mind. It is good for nations. Above all, it is good for souls." Well, so wrote J.C. Ryle, one-time Bishop of Liverpool. But perhaps you might think again about Sundays, about the Sabbath, how it might be good for your bodies and for your souls. After all, as Jesus said, it was made for us.